Okay, so it has started recording. Welcome to the first lecture of this course, MA 813, Measure Theory. And as I said last time, we will closely follow, we will almost line by line, we will follow Rudin's book, Real and Complex Analysis. And it's a small class, only 8 students, so I hope everyone will participate. Feel free to ask questions or comments, whatever. And let's see. So today's is the first real lecture. Akshay also has joined now. So today is the first real lecture, and let's see uh, how the speed will be, and we will adjust in the next lectures depending on how much we are able to cover, etc. Okay, so without more details, I hope I am audible clearly, and let me start sharing the screen, and maybe you can confirm that you can see it properly. So I'll share the full desktop. What do you see now? One of you can confirm
Presentations.
that you can see the slides,
Presentation.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so it's full view, no? It's on your full screen, right? You can see it clearly, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So what I will do is, so I have shared, the desktop. So now I am on this page and I won't be able to see the MS Teams page. Okay. So don't put anything on the chat because I will not see it because I'm no longer on that page. So what you do is when you have a question, you actually ask me. I mean, you actually unmute. So keep it muted so that there won't be much disturbance. But whenever you have to ask me something, you unmute and then ask. Okay. So no chat, only direct asking. Okay. So today's last time was lecture 0. So we meet on Wednesdays and Fridays, 11 to 12:30. So we already had our first class, which I have called 0th class because we were only talking to each other. And this is the first lecture. And the key word today is, okay, so today's lecture, maybe many of you are already familiar with these concepts, but maybe Rudin does it a bit more abstractly compared to what is usually covered in MSc. We will see. Okay. So I have forgotten what exactly is covered in MSc, but we will see. We are starting from scratch. So the key word today is measurability. Okay. Let's see. So formally welcome to the first lecture of MA 813. And as I just said, we will closely follow Rudin's book. Which book is this? Real and Complex Analysis. This is the second book. As we discussed last time, Rodin has 3 very famous analysis textbooks. First one is the usual MSc book for real analysis, and this is the second book, Real and Complex Analysis. And then there's a third book which is titled Functional Analysis. That's also a great book from which I taught once or twice. Okay, so we will closely follow this book. Rarely, I might go outside this book, and if I do that, I'll give a reference at that time. But typically, we will stick to this book. And if no reference is given, it's understood that the reference is Rodin. Everything is from Rodin, so I won't say this again and again. Once and for one throughout the course, we will stick to Rodin. In particular, we will follow Rodin's notations. Okay. So in the lectures or in your exam, wherever, if I don't explain a notation, it's a notation that's coming in the slides, which is exactly the notation that is coming in Rodin's book. So today we will introduce the notions of a measurable space and a measurable function on a measurable space. These are the two things that we will do today. And in the next lecture, we will introduce what is a measure. Okay, so a measure defined on a measure space. But today we will not do that. Today we will discuss measurable space and the notion of a measurable function. So as Rudin says in the introduction itself, one analogy that one can keep in mind is a topological space. And what would be the equivalent of a measurable function if you were dealing with topological space? What are the correct kinds of functions that one studies? Someone can quickly tell me?
Continuous functions.
Continuous functions. So analogy to keep in mind is topological spaces and continuous functions. So here the right thing is a measurable function. We will introduce it. Okay, it will be very analogous to what you have already seen in topology. So X is a set, and we are going to take a collection of subsets of X. So this is exactly as in topology. And there you will define, you will have a collection of open sets, and here I have taken a collection of subsets of X, and suppose this collection of subsets of X, so X is any set, M is a collection of subsets, and suppose this satisfies three conditions. Okay, what are the conditions? The first condition is the full set belongs to M, and the second condition is if A is in M, then its complement is also in M. Any set, it's if you take any set from this collection, then its complement is also there. And the last condition is if you have a countable collection of sets. So if you have a countable collection, you can assume its natural numbers and you can index using natural numbers. So suppose you have A1, A2, A3, etc. are sets in M, then their union is also in M. So any countable collection if you take, and if you take the union, so any countable union, that is also in your set. Suppose this set satisfies these three conditions. Some of you have seen this in MSc already, or this is not how it was done?
I think it was definition of
We have
sigma
seen this.
algebra, sir.
You have seen this in MSc?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
Yes,
so
sir.
if M
Yes.
satisfies these three conditions, what is the name for M?
Sigma algebra.
Sigma algebra. Okay, very
Sigma
good.
algebra.
So this M has the full set in it, and it is closed under taking complement. It's also closed under taking countable unions. Such an M is called a sigma algebra in X. Okay, it's called a sigma algebra in X. So sigma sometimes stands for countable. I don't know how standard it is, but anyway, in this course, sigma stands for countable. If closure is given only under finite unions, then M is called an algebra of sets. Suppose the last condition, third condition, closure is given only on under finite unions, then you say that it is an algebra of sets. So here it is given under countable unions, and we call it a sigma algebra. So let's continue. This is clear that empty set belongs to M if M is a sigma algebra. Why is that?
Complement of
That
X.
whole set belonging to this.
All set
complement
belongs
of
to
it.
X, and you can take its complement. So empty set belongs there. M is closed under finite unions is clear?
Oh, yes.
Yes, sir. Using the yes, sir.
Yes, because under countable unions it is true, and all but these finitely many you can take it to be the empty set. They are also there. So a finite union is also a countable union, with the rest being empty sets. So this is also fine. M is closed under countable and therefore finite also intersections. Is this okay?
Yes.
Countable
Okay.
intersection.
Yes, sir.
Why
Yes.
does this follow?
Take complement.
Yeah, you can take countable union, and union when you take complement it will be intersection. So countable intersections also it is closed. So these are all properties that will follow. If A and B are two sets, you know the difference, right? Those elements which are in A but not in B, A minus B. And maybe I'm changing my notation here. Maybe Rodin writes A actually minus sign, but this is a better notation. A minus B. This also belongs to M. Why is that? Because A minus B is nothing but A intersection B complement. Because B is there, B complement is there, A is also there, and finite intersection is there, so this also is there. So all these will follow automatically. Okay, so let's continue. So suppose M is a sigma algebra in X, then X is called a measurable space, and the members of M are called the measurable sets in X. Okay, so a measurable space is nothing but an arbitrary set together with a given sigma algebra. So we will call X a measurable space, but what it actually means is a pair, an ordered pair X comma M. M is given to you. Okay, it's a sigma algebra, and the elements of M. So there are various subsets of X. Some may belong to M, some may not belong to M. what belongs to M is called a measurable set. This is the definition. Is it clear? Can you give an any set?
Yes.
Can you give an obvious sigma algebra? The most obvious sigma algebra.
Power
The
set.
power set of
Power.
X.
Power set. Take the collection of all subsets. So clearly there are sigma algebras, and then you may take some other collection, sub collection, which also satisfies all those axioms. And x comma m is given, and a measurable set is an element of M, and X is called a measurable space. So when we say that X is a measurable space, M is understood to be given, and we are in fact talking about X comma M, but we may not always write X comma M. We will just say X. Okay, but M is always there when we talk about measurable space. Now suppose X is a measurable space, so understood there is an M. Okay, there is an M which is a sigma algebra which is given to you, and so X is a measurable space and Y is a topological space. So when you say Y is a topological space, a collection of open sets is given to you, right? Y comma tau, tau is a collection of open sets which satisfy certain properties which you know very well. Okay, suppose this is given to you. The domain is a measurable space and the codomain is a topological space, and now you're going to define if this function is measurable. This is some function, it is measurable. If you know the definition, you can tell me.
F inverse of open set from Y.
Inverse
to the
open.
measurable
Yeah,
set.
inverse image of,
Yes.
so if both were topological spaces, then how do you define continuity? Inverse image of an open set is open. Here the left hand side is not topological space, it is a measurable space, but the same definition, similar definition, inverse image of an open set is measurable. What is the meaning of measurable? It belongs to M. So for any V contained in Y open, F inverse V belongs to M, then you say that F is measurable. Whatever open set you take, inverse image is measurable, then the function is said to be measurable. Okay, so X is a measurable
Sir.
space. Yeah.
Sir, here we are
Yeah.
taking Y as a topological space. Can we
Yes.
take Y also as a measurable space and then define like this?
It's a good question. So you could have taken what you have in mind is X and Y are measurable spaces, and then you might
then-
say that inverse image of a measurable set is measurable, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So that's also okay, but we will stick to this. Okay, for us this is all that we are considering. The real reason is, if you think of your MSc, what was Y in MSc?
R.
R. Yeah. So
Here.
that's a real basic example. R, or we might take C. Okay.
Yes.
Or we might take some other field or whatever, and that's where it's going to be interesting, and the relationship between continuity and measurable also. Okay. So we will stick to this. You could have started like that, and you could have built a theory like that, and maybe it is already there, but this is what is of interest to us in this course. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, so for us, measurable functions are valued in topological spaces. Keep in mind, mostly R or sometimes C. Okay. So it need not be R. In fact, in your MSc course, it was not R actually. Can you tell me what exactly it was in your MSc course?
Metric space.
No, it is R only, but
Extended
you
real numbers.
extended real line is typically what you take.
Oh,
In
yes.
your MSc measure theory, minus infinity to infinity, including both ends, and it has the most natural topology, right? So that's what you would take. Okay, but we will have occasion to take just R, not extended real line, and just C, not C union infinity. All these will come. Okay, we will see later, future. So this definition is clear. Now X is a measurable space, and Y and Z are topological spaces. So we have a notion of measurable function from X to Y. You have a notion of Y to Z. So F is, let us say, a measurable function. The notion makes sense, no? F can be defined to be measurable, right? Because X is measurable and Y is topological. G is from topological to topological. So what kind of a function G is? What is a good function? G? Continuous. Okay.
Continuous.
Suppose you have this, you can compose these functions, and the composition is from x to z. So what is a natural question to ask? G composed with fs.
Is it measurable function?
Is it measurable or not? Is the
Measurable.
most natural question to ask. So suppose f is measurable and g is continuous. You want to take a guess? What is going to come in the slide? Next line. G
F
composed
composed
f
G is
not f composed G, no?
measurable.
Our notation will be G composed f,
Yeah,
right?
G measurable,
Yeah.
measurable.
Yeah, and you are all saying that it is measurable, and that is the statement. And my question is why? So what is the proof?
because
What do you
if
have to check?
we
You have
take
to take an
a
arbitrary open set in
Z,
Z. So let V be an open set in Z,
Z,
and you have to take G composed with F whole inverse of V. So what is G composed F inverse V?
F inverse.
it's equal to
F
F inverse composed G
F inverse of G inverse of V. But G is given to be continuous. Therefore, what can you say about G inverse of V?
G inverse
Open.
is continuous.
It is open.
Open. V is open, and therefore G inverse of V is open. And now you are taking F inverse of this open set G inverse V. But that will be measurable. Why? Because F is given to be measurable from X to Y. So that gives the proof of this. So I am not writing it down because, why am I not writing it down? Because it's obvious and you have already given me the proof. Okay. So continuous composed measurable is always measurable, and that's going to be very, very useful. And now let us do one more small proposition. Suppose u and v are from x to r. So now your topological space is real numbers, and these are given to be measurable. So you have two measurable functions, and I'm going to give a map from x to r2. What is the most obvious map that I can define from x to r2 in terms of u and v? You tell me. What is the most obvious map that I can define? U comma v. So x going to ordered pair u of x comma v of x. So consider this function x to r2. Question is this measurable? Right? Because R2 is a topological space, and you can ask whether this function f given by x going to ux comma vx, is this measurable? What is your answer? By the way, I should tell you this. Many times, you should be able to guess an answer. Whether, your guess may be right, it may be wrong. But you should have, one viewpoint, and you should think, you should ask whether intuitively, you think the answer is yes or no. And you can say that. You can be wrong. So you can say yes, you can say no. You may have some reason, and then we will see whether we can prove it or contradict what you said.
So
what
this
is your
case,
guess?
this is measurable.
This is measurable is what you feel, and answer is yes. So now you have to give a proof. This is true. So how do you give a proof? You have to give any arbitrary open set in R2, and you have to take the inverse image under F, and that has to be in M. M is there. X comes with the sigma algebra M. That is always understood. So how do you want to proceed? Because in R, what are the basic open sets? Open intervals, right? And in R2, maybe basic open sets can be given in various ways, but let us do it in terms of open intervals. An open interval in the x-axis and an open interval in the y-axis. That will give you an open rectangle, right? And open rectangles will form a basis, no?
Yes, sir.
Any open set can be written as a union of open rectangles, right? Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Is it true that any open set in R2 can be written as a countable union of open rectangles?
Yeah.
That also is okay, right? You can visualize that. So anything can be written as a countable union of open rectangles. And let us use that property now. So do you agree that it is enough to show it for open rectangle? The inverse image of an open rectangle is measurable is enough, right?
Yes, sir.
Because any arbitrary open set will be a countable union of open rectangle. And what is F inverse of a union of sets? It is union of F inverse, right? F inverse of A union B is F inverse A union F inverse B, and this is true for any arbitrary union. So if you take any open set, write it as a countable union of open rectangles, and inverse image of this union will be a countable union of inverse image of open rectangle. So if you have shown that inverse image of one open rectangle belongs to M, then what you have is a countable union of elements of M, and M is closed under countable unions. Agree? So what we have said verbally is that it is enough to show for one open rectangle. And can you finish the proof for open rectangle? Suppose you have open intervals ij, then f inverse of I cross j, right? That's an open rectangle. What is f inverse of I cross j? That means ux belongs to I and vx belongs to j, right? If fx belongs to I cross j, that means ux belongs to I, vx belongs to j. In other words, f inverse of I cross j is u inverse of I intersection v inverse of j. And this belongs to M. Why is that true?
Because U and V are measurable.
Because U and V are measurable. I is open, J is open. So U inverse I belongs to M. V inverse J belongs to M. Therefore, the intersection belongs to M. Okay, so we are done. And any open set is there. Countable is important here because M is known to be closed only under countable unions. So countable, that's why I have underlined. Any open set is a countable union of such open rectangles, and therefore this is done. And this is useful. It follows that if U and V are given to be measurable and Y is any topological space. So here I have done it for R2, and now I am saying if Y is any topological space, and if phi is a function from R2 to Y is topological space. Consider R2 also as a topological space, and let phi be continuous. Okay. Can you guess the statement? Yeah, tell me.
So the previous slide we are showing for a basic rectangle. I could not understand that argument.
Because this argument, right? So basic rectangle will be of the form I cross J. You agree with that?
Yes, sir.
So you have to do f inverse of I cross J. You have to show that this belongs to M, right? You agree with that?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
But do you agree that f inverse of I cross J is same as U inverse of I intersection V inverse of J? Is that the step where you have a problem?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let us check. What is, by definition, what is f inverse of I cross J? This is those elements x and capital X, small x and capital X, such that f of x belongs to I cross J, right?
Yeah.
But fx belongs to I cross J. But what is fx? Fx is, you can see my mouse moving, my cursor moving, right? So f of x is ux comma vx. But if ux comma vx belongs to I cross J, what does that mean? That means ux belongs to I and vx belongs to J, right?
Yes, sir.
But ux belongs to I is same as saying x belongs to u inverse of I. And vx belongs to J is same as x belongs to v inverse of J. So x has to belongs to u inverse of I, and x has to belong to v inverse of J. Therefore, x belongs to the intersection.
Okay.
And the other way also, if x belongs to the intersection, then ux belongs to I, vx belongs to J. If that is the case, then fx belongs to I cross J. So this containment is true, the other containment is also true, therefore that's equal.
Yeah. Okay.
And this belongs to M because U and V are measurable. And any open set is a countable union, therefore the proof is over. Agree?
Yes. Yeah.
Who was this? By the way, I can't see MS Teams, so
Suraj.
I can't hear you.
Suraj.
Okay. Good, Suraj. Yeah. So it's clear now, no?
Yes,
so
sir.
Feel free to ask questions like this. It's always better. So now we are saying that U and V are real measure. So I will say if the codomain is R, I will say these are real measurable functions. And if the codomain is C, I will say these are complex measurable functions. Okay. And Y is any topological space, and phi is a continuous function from R2 to Y. Can you guess the statement, what we are going to say now? So you can think of a map from X to Y, right? What is the obvious map from X to Y? What is the
Composition
obvious map from x to y? X going to
R square.
x going to R2 as ux comma vx, and then apply. I need to land in y. Then apply.
Then apply phi.
Then apply phi. So the map is x going to phi of ux comma vx.
Oh, it's for-
Phi of ux comma vx. And so that is the map H. H is a map from x to y defined by phi of ux comma vx. X is measurable, y is topological space. So it makes sense to ask whether this map is, what is the question? Is this map
Measurable. Measurable.
measurable? And what is your answer?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Why? Is the proof clear? So the question
that
is it measurable? And the answer is yes. And what is the proof?
Sir, by previous theorem,
By previous theorem. Because
Composition of continuous.
yeah,
define
because
composition of
Absolutely.
continuous and measurable function.
absolutely. So we just proved in the last slide that x going to ux comma vx, that map is measurable, and phi is given to be continuous. Therefore, you are in a situation where you have continuous composed with measurable, and we have already observed that continuous composed with measurable is measurable. Therefore, this is measurable. Okay, very, very good. You can have a lot of corollaries to the previous two observations. What are the two observations? One is this one, that if phi is a continuous map from R2 to a topological space, then x going to phi of ux comma vx, that is measurable. And the other observation is anyway continuous measurable composed with, no, which way? Continuous composed with measurable, that is measurable. And these two observations, right? These are the two observations. No, one is this, and before that this. Continuous composed with measurable is measurable. And a corollary to all this is, lot of corollaries. Rudin states 5 corollaries. Okay, so I am going to state 4 of them together and 1 separately. Rudin states 5 together. I am stating 4 of them together and 1 separately. The first one is, if u and v are real measurable. What is the meaning of real measurable? U and v are measurable functions valued in real numbers. Then f valued in r. Yes. Then the first claim is f equal to u plus iv. F equal to u plus iv. This is complex measurable, meaning it's measurable valued in complex numbers. This is obvious, right? What are you doing here? You're taking the map ux comma vx, that is in R2. And what is the map from R2 to C that you are considering? R2 to C. What is the most obvious map that you are considering? X comma y going to
X plus iy.
X plus
x
I.
plus iy. Is that map continuous under the natural topologies?
Yes.
Yes. And therefore, this is a corollary to the previous result, right? So phi is the map. Phi is the map x comma y going to x plus iy. So if you do that, this automatically follows. And if f is complex measurable, f is a complex valued function, and f is complex measurable, so f is a function from x to r. X is a measurable space, and c is complex numbers. F is from x to r, that is given to be measurable. And the claim is that all these functions are real measurable. Real part of f, that's a real valued function. Imaginary part of f, that's a real valued function. Mod f, that is also a real valued function. What is mod f? Mod f is, if you have the function u plus iv, mod f is
U square plus v square. Root of
u square plus v square, or root of u square plus v square.
Root of
root of u square plus v
So that's
square.
also a real valued function. All these are real measurable. All these are measurable. Why is this true? This is corollary to which observation? This is corollary to the observation that continuous composed measurable is measurable. So
Yes,
measurable
but we
function
are-
f is given. And what is a continuous function that you are taking?
projection map.
Projection map. So C to R, if you take the real part, C to R, if you take Z going to real part of Z, that is continuous, no? And similarly, C to R, if you take projection to Y axis, Z going to imaginary part of Z, that is also continuous. And Z going to mod Z is also continuous, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So applying continuous composed measurable is measurable. to all these three functions, this follows. Okay, so this is also fine. Now suppose f and g are real measurable, then I am claiming that f plus g and fg are real measurable. And if f and g are complex measurable, then I am claiming that f plus g and fg are complex measurable. Let's do for real first. F and g are real measurable. How do you show that f plus g is also real measurable? So
We
f
can
and g
use
are,
the common.
yeah, you use the other observation where you take phi to be the map from R2 to R given by, what is the map from R2
X
to R?
comma y goes to x comma y goes to x plus y and xy.
Yeah, we are doing only f plus g. So x comma y going to x plus y, that map if you take, that is a continuous map, and apply composition. So that shows that f plus g is measurable. And for fg, what is your suggestion? X comma y going to
xy.
xy. That is also continuous, right? Addition and multiplication both are continuous from R2 to R. And that follows, therefore it follows that f plus g and fg are real measurable. So what have we just proved? We have proved that if f and g are real measurable, then f plus g is real measurable and fg is real measurable. Now suppose f and g are complex measurable. How do you show that f plus g is complex measurable? So if f and g are complex measurable, from the previous line, you know that real part of f and real part of g are real measurable, right? And similarly, imaginary part of f and imaginary part of g are real measurable. Therefore, from what you just proved for real measurable, real part of f plus real part of g is real measurable, right?
Yes.
Similarly, imaginary part of f plus imaginary part of g is real measurable. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Now you know that if u and v are real measurable, then u plus iv is complex measurable. Therefore, real part of f plus g plus I times imaginary part of f plus g is complex measurable. But what is real part of f plus g plus I times imaginary part of f plus g? That is just f plus g, right?
F plus.
Therefore, f plus g is complex measurable. Similarly, fg is complex measurable. Agree? Because our result for phi, that was in terms of real functions, but using that and real part, imaginary part argument, you can do it for complex functions also. And the next result is, if E is a measurable set, then what is this function chi E? What is chi E? Characteristic function, or some people call it, there's another word.
Index function, maybe.
Index
Simple
or
function.
indicator? Indicator?
Indicator function. Indicator
Some
function.
people call it indicator function. Rudin calls it characteristic function. Anyway, I am also used to the word characteristic function. So we will call it characteristic function. So if E belongs to M, then the characteristic function of E. So what is the definition of chi E? What are the values it takes?
1 if x is in
1
E,
or
or
0.
0 otherwise.
0 otherwise. If X is not in E, then it is 0. Now this is measurable. So how do you show this? So you have to take inverse image of any open set. So how are we considering chi E? This is valued in R, right? We are going to consider it as valued in R. So you have to take any open set in R and you have to show that inverse image of that open set belongs to M. But what are the possible inverse images that you can get? What are the whatever open set you take, what are the inverse images possible?
Either E or M or phi or whole set.
There is no M. Either
Oh,
E
sorry,
or
E. Either E or empty set or whole set. No.
either E or
Also
empty
E
set.
complement.
Empty set. It is not phi, it is empty set. It's another
Okay.
notation. Okay, so either E or empty set or the whole set or
E complement.
E complement.
complement of E is also possible. But all these belong to M, right? Empty set
Yes,
and whole
yes,
set
yes.
are anyway there. Because E is there, E complement is also there. So all the four possibilities, all those belong to M, and therefore chi E is measurable. So this is this is very easy but very important. So today I will not talk about it, but in the next lecture we will introduce simple functions, and that will be the basis of Lebesgue's theory of integration. Okay. So what is a simple function, by the way, since anyway I mentioned the name?
Sum of character functions.
Yeah, so
sum of character.
sum or a linear combination?
Sorry, linear.
Linear.
combination.
A linear combination of characteristic functions of measurable sets. Those are called simple functions, and they will be a beautiful way of building the theory of integration using that. We will do that next time. Okay, so if E is measurable, then characteristic function of E is measurable. And Rudin's fifth corollary, I am stating it separately. We are going to observe that a complex measurable function f, given a complex measurable function f, there is a measurable function of unit absolute value. What is the meaning of unit absolute value? Mod f is 1. So there is some function, let us say alpha, so mod alpha is 1, such that f can be written as alpha times mod f. F is alpha times mod f. Very believable, right? But we need to give a proof. So, so just to keep in mind, this is of course expected, because if you take a non-zero complex number, then you can always write it as z by mod z times mod z, right? Divided by mod z is okay because it's non-zero. And what is the absolute value of z by mod z?
It's 1.
It's 1. So any complex number can be written as its absolute value, which is a positive real number, times a complex number of absolute value 1. And we are saying that for a function also you can do that, and for a measurable function you can do that. So you can write a measurable function as product of two measurable functions. You already know that if f is measurable, then mod f is measurable, and we are claiming that there exists a measurable function alpha of unit absolute value such that f can be written as alpha times mod f. So let's prove this. If f is, suppose f is never 0. Okay, f may take value 0, but suppose for a moment that f is never 0, x to c star if it's valued, then what is your candidate for alpha? Look at what you want to get. You want to get this. So what is the candidate for alpha?
F upon mod alpha, mod f,
F of mod
A
f.
bit louder. F by
mod f.
Mod f.
f by mod f. Why does that make sense? This makes sense because
F is
f
non-zero.
is never 0. F is never 0. But the question is, why is this measurable? Is this function measurable, alpha?
Yes, sir, because we are considering another continuous function by multiplication by 1
What is
by
that
mod x.
continuous function? What is that continuous function?
Z upon mod
X.
z.
You can say this is product of two measurable functions.
Say that
Oh,
again.
no. It is product of two measurable functions.
Why?
F and 1
Why is this a product of two? I don't see that this is a product of two measurable functions.
Z upon mod z.
You are taking f and 1 by mod f,
Yes.
but f is measurable is given. Mod f is measurable, I know, but why 1 by mod f?
So z by mod z is continuous and you compose
Yeah,
f
so you
with
can
it.
apply that
Yes.
directly. So 1 by mod f
Yes.
is also, it is true, but you have to apply that argument first because we have not done it yet. So what you do is you consider the maps z going to z by mod z. That is continuous. Where is this valued? Z going to z by mod z, you are taking c star to c star. Okay, and that is continuous, and composing with that. So f composed with, no, that map composed with f will be measurable because f is measurable. So this is measurable. So this is measurable because alpha is phi composed f if phi z is z by mod z and phi is continuous. Phi is a map from c star to, either you can take the unit circle or let us say c star to c star. It's continuous. Okay, therefore f by mod f is continuous. So we are done. We are not quite done. Why? Because we don't know that f will be always non-zero, right? Function may have 0 also, right? So this is not a proof. This is not quite a proof because f may take value 0. F may take value 0. So let us analyze where it takes the points where it takes 0. Let us analyze. So f can have zeros. So consider the collection of all the zeros of f. So take E to be all those x such that f of x is 0. Okay. And is this set measurable? Is E measurable? E is a subset of x. Does E belong to M?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Why?
So because it is a complement of a inverse image of an open set, so this is
Yeah.
measurable.
So it is inverse image of a closed set, and inverse image of a closed set is also measurable because closed set is complement of an open set, and therefore inverse image of a closed set will be complement of inverse image of open set, and therefore that will be measurable because it's closed under complements. So this is measurable, and therefore the characteristic function of E is measurable. Okay, now we are going to do a small adjustment using the characteristic function. Take alpha to be, instead of phi composed f, you take phi composed with f plus chi e. You agree that alpha will have modulus 1, no? Because it is phi composed with something. Phi composed with anything will have modulus 1 because phi is z by mod z. Okay, so modulus is okay. And is f plus chi e measurable?
Yes.
Yes, because f is
Yes.
measurable, chi e is measurable, and sum of two measurable functions is measurable. And therefore, phi compose f plus chi e is measurable is also okay. So alpha is measurable, alpha has absolute value 1, both these are okay. So what is the only thing that needs to be checked? We only need to check that
F plus
indeed.
chi is non-zero.
Okay.
Huh? No, f plus chi e can be, f plus chi e is anyway non-zero, no? Yeah, check f plus chi e is non-zero. How do you check f plus chi e is non-zero? If f is non-zero, then chi e takes a value 0. Therefore, sum of 0 plus non-zero is non-zero. And if f is 0, then chi e takes a value 1, and therefore f plus chi e is 1. So that is also non-zero. So that's okay. That is okay. Good. So that we checked. Now there is one more thing to be checked.
Modulus is 1.
Modulus 1 is obvious because it is phi composed with anything, modulus is 1. But there is one last thing to be checked. What is it?
Measurable or not?
Measurable is checked because f is measurable, chi e is measurable, therefore the sum is measurable, and continuous composed measurable is measurable. There's one more thing to be checked.
Product.
Yeah, the
What
product
is
actually matches. You have to check this. You have to check that f is alpha times mod f. So let's check that. F is alpha times mod f. Is that obvious? So suppose fx is 0. Let us check at the point where fx is 0. So what is alpha of x? If f of x is 0, what is alpha of x?
It is 1.
Alpha of x is 1, and what is mod f of x?
It is 0.
0. And therefore the product alpha times mod f is 0. Left hand side is also 0. So if fx is 0, it's okay. If fx is non-zero, what is alpha of x?
F of x by modulus of f of x.
Fx by modulus of fx, and multiply by modulus of fx. So modulus of fx cancels, and you get the answer f of x. So that's also okay. Agree? So this is verified that this particular alpha f equal to alpha times mod f. So that's also a useful observation, and all of you are clear with this proof, no? So if it was never 0, there was an obvious way, but if it is 0, adjust with that set, adjust with the characteristic function of that set, and observe that this alpha satisfies all those properties. So you can have this nice product of unit absolute value times this positive real valued function mod f, and with the property that this unit absolute value function is also measurable. That is the most important point. Okay, now sometimes it's good to have a slogan, kind of a catchy statement. So I have copy pasted that as a title of this slide. Sigma, this is Rudin's sentence. Rudin in page 12 writes that sigma algebras exist in great profusion. What does that mean? What is the meaning of this English sentence? Yeah, what is profusion?
Plentiful.
Hmm?
Plentiful.
Yeah, plentiful. Yeah, they exist in plenty, meaning wherever you look, you can find sigma algebras. There are so many sigma algebras. See, this is important, no? It may be trivial, it may be easy to prove it, but it is important to make this observation, right? Do you agree that it is important to make this observation? Why is
Yes,
this?
sir, it's important.
Why is it important to make this observation in this course?
Because always we are talking about measurable space, measurable
Yeah,
functions.
always we are going to talk about sigma algebras. If they don't exist in so many things, then what is there to study, right? Suppose there are only two sigma algebras, then you could have studied one today and one tomorrow and end of the matter, no? So unless they exist in plenty, there's no theory, right? This is how, you know, in topological spaces, you want to show that there are lots of continuous maps, right? Otherwise, you know, what is there to study, right? Topology is studying continuous functions only, no? But do you have such a theorem that there are so many continuous functions? Continuous functions exist in great profusion. Do you have such a theorem? Or an observation or a theorem or a lemma? I don't know.
Uh,
You may have
yes,
to put some conditions on topological space. After all, you know, you are not in topology. Do you study arbitrary topological spaces? That's where you start, but then you will put some conditions, no, so that you have beautiful theorems, right? You may assume that it is Hausdorff or, you know, one of the Hausdorff kind of axioms, right? You have gradation, no? T1, T2, right? Is there
yes.
something called
Uh,
T1.5 or something? I've forgotten. Yeah, there are, you know, what are they called? These kind of gradation, T1, T2. What is a word for these kind of notions?
Separation axioms.
Separation axioms. So you know you will put the correct kind of separation axioms, and then you may have beautiful theorems. Sometimes you may show that a topological space is actually a metric space, right? If you throw in enough axioms, you may get such a result, no? Metrizable,
Yes,
Yes.
right?
sir.
So you have homeomorphic to a metric space is what is metrizable, no? So you may have such results, but do you remember in some contest after putting enough conditions, do you remember a result which says that there exist continuous functions in great profusion?
Yes, sir. In terms of functionals, at
Yeah.
last,
What is the word?
functionals on vector
No.
space.
What is a theorem? What is a lemma?
Minkowski's
So I don't know what that is. Minkowski. What does that say? I don't remember what is Minkowski's result in topology.
not topology, like I'm saying in functional, like if
No, I am asking this question. I am not asking about functionals. The question is exactly like here. If you did not know that there are so many continuous functions, then you know it's not quite interesting, right? You should know that there are so many continuous functions. What is the meaning of saying there are so many functions of a certain property? Forget continuity. Whatever property P that you are studying, what is the meaning of saying? How do you show that? How do you say that there are so many such functions? What is the meaning of saying that? What is a good notion of so many that you can think of?
Collection of functions. Such functions.
Yeah, but what is so many? Is that collection have a particular cardinality? Is that so many, or is there another way of formulating? See, so many meaning whatever, however much you want. There should be plenty.
Yes.
So, what is a way of formulating plenty for functions? Where are functions acting on? Functions are defined on some domain, right? That domain is a set, right? Set may have some
Yes.
further property. It may be a topological space, it may be a measurable space, it may be some other, it may be a group, or it may be a ring, or whatever. But these functions, and if it's topological space, you are interested in continuous functions, etc. But what's the meaning of saying, what's a good notion of they are there in plenty? If you take 2 points from your set, suppose x is your set, and if you take 2 points, let us say small x and small y, and in order to say these are 2 points, what do you have to say on x and y? These are actually 2 points, not the same point. So x not equal to y. Then what do you want to say about a function? There are so many functions. What is one way of capturing that notion?
there they're not equal at least one point.
Yeah, so if x not equal to y, there exists a function which also is not equal at the images, fx not equal to fy, right? That will be a
Yes.
good notion, no?
Yeah.
So whatever 2 points you give me, if I can produce a function such that fx not equal to fy, that means there are plenty of functions. So some kind of separation. Now, can you think of some resultant topology which guarantees something like this? I'm not talking about 2 points, maybe even better. Then you should say there exists a continuous function which separates. Is there such a result that you have proved?
Horizon
You may have to
lemma,
throw in some conditions on your topological space.
is it like
I think
horizon
it is possible by Hahn-Banach theorem, but it is in functional.
Say that again.
horizon
It is
lemma?
I think one of you said it. I think I heard it, but I'm not sure.
Hahn-Banach theorem. Hahn-Banach theorem.
Hahn-Banach theorem is not in topology, no? What is
Horizon
Hahn-Banach theorem?
lemma, sir.
But it is
Yeah, Hahn-Banach theorem is correct. It's in the same spirit, but that is not in
Yes.
topology. I asked about topology. If I asked about functional analysis, then you are right. You have given me. So, okay. So, my philosophical question you have answered because it guarantees enough continuous. Yeah, you are right. In the context of functional analysis, Hahn-Banach theorem answers the question. Because what does Hahn-Banach theorem finally guarantees? If you have a non-linear space X, then you have enough continuous linear functionals. Continuous linear functionals exist in profusion, great profusion. That is Hahn-Banach theorem. Yeah, so it's in the similar spirit. Though I did not have that in mind, you are absolutely right. Hahn-Banach theorem in non-linear spaces is exactly this result. Exists in great profusion. But the other person has answered in topology. What is that?
Horizon's lemma, sir.
Horizon's lemma. So that says exists in continuous functions exist in plenty, right? What exactly does it say? It separates what and what? There exists a continuous function.
Which separates two closed sets, like
Yeah, so it's even better than separating 2 points. And what are the conditions that you put on the topological space? Do you need Hausdorff? No.
Normal.
X would be normal.
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 So normal is more than Hausdorff, no?
Yes.
And you need normal? I have forgotten.
Yeah,
You need
it
normal?
requires normal.
Normal. Okay, very good. So this result will play an important role in our course measure theory. Though I said I have forgotten, it is true I have forgotten, but it will come soon. Okay, so I cannot forget for longer. I have to look at it soon. Okay, because that plays a very crucial role as soon as we are in the next chapter. Okay, one of the most fundamental results of this course, Urysohn's lemma is a key ingredient. We will see. Okay, so this is much more trivial. This is actually a trivial observation that sigma algebras exist in great profusion. So what you do is make this following observation. Suppose f is any collection of subsets of x, then of course there is, then we are going to make this statement that there exists a smallest sigma algebra m star in X such that it contains F. Whatever collection of subsets you give, I'm going to claim that there is a smallest sigma algebra I have written, but a moment's observation will tell you the smallest sigma algebra. Because by the way you are creating, there cannot be two such. The smallest sigma algebra containing F. Suppose you make this observation, then you agree with this English sentence that sigma algebras exist in great profusion. If we prove this, then this is true, no? They exist in great profusion, right?
Yes.
Because you can take any collection, and I'm going to say that there is a sigma algebra containing that, and not just there is a sigma algebra containing that. There is a smallest sigma algebra containing that. So my answer is not always the power set. See, power set always there. So there is always one sigma algebra, which is the power set. But given any collection, I'm not saying there is a sigma algebra containing that. That will be power set only. But I'm saying there is the smallest containing that. So if you take a smaller collection, I will get a smaller sigma algebra. So there are enough sigma algebras. And how do I do this? And here is a word. This is sometimes called the sigma algebra generated by F. Okay. And what is the proof? Proof is consider the collection of all sigma algebras containing F. And you have to hunt for the smallest. Okay. So this collection, is this a non-empty collection?
Yes, power set is there.
This collection is non-empty because power set is there. So power set is there. And now you take M star to be intersection of M, M belongs to omega. And you know, you are lucky in this situation. From my notation itself, you know what I'm going to say next. What is my next line? Just
Yes,
check the
sir.
way I have put the notation. What is my next line? Say it again.
M star is sigma algebra.
M star is a sigma algebra. And by construction, if it is a sigma algebra, it is going to be the smallest, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So let us check why is it a sigma algebra? Is the full set there?
Yes.
Because X belongs to M for each M. Therefore, X
Yes.
belongs to the intersection. If A belongs to M star, is a complement there?
Yes.
Yes, because A belongs to M, therefore A complement belongs to M, and this happens for all such M. So
Yeah.
A complement belongs to M star, and similarly for countable unions, right?
Countable. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Therefore, M star is clearly a sigma algebra, and this is easy, and that's all that you need to show, right? This will be by construction the smallest sigma algebra containing F, no? Because you are taking intersection of all the sigma algebras containing F, so it has to be the smallest. So that means they exist in great profusion. So we are in a topic where there are enough things to do. Okay, there are enough interesting theory that you know, you are not going to study an empty set or something. We are going to study a rich theory. Okay. Now we are going to make this observation. So here are two names that are coming in this course: Borel and Hausdorff. Hausdorff you already know in topology. Borel also you already know in topology and real analysis. No, where have you seen Borel before? Even before measure theory, you have seen Borel. What is a famous theorem? There are two famous theorems that you would have seen in MSc real analysis, right? Heine Borel and Heine Borel and okay, only Heine Borel. Yeah, I had in mind Bolzano Weierstrass, but Bolzano is not Borel. Yeah, fine. Other than Heine Borel, nothing you see in real analysis? Yeah, maybe not. But in measure theory, you have seen Borel already or not yet?
Borel-Cantelli lemma.
Hmm?
Borel-Cantelli lemma in probability.
Borel-Cantelli lemma, have you seen in MSc already?
In probability theory, I have seen.
Ah, okay, very good. So that will come in our course very soon. Not very soon, maybe not in the next lecture after that. Borel-Cantelli lemma, same Borel. And have you seen the notion of Borel set in MSc measure theory?
Borel sets are collection
sir.
of open sets maybe.
Yeah, it comes from open set, so we will define it. So this is Emily Borel. There is also another famous Borel, which you might not have heard of. This is old Borel. This is 1871 to 1956 Borel. And there's another Borel who died only, who passed away only 15 years back. Armand Borel, modern, much more modern mathematician. And that name you may not see in any course that you take, because unless you take a very advanced course in algebraic geometry or algebraic groups or something. Anyway, and Hausdorff, of course, you know, I mean, topology is all about Hausdorff. Other than topology, have you seen Hausdorff?
Like Hausdorff's maximality principle, similar to John's lemma.
Okay, okay. I think that must be the same Hausdorff. And anywhere else? Okay, it's a famous name somewhere else also in dynamical systems and all that. But anyway, okay, so it also comes from measure theory only. Dynamical systems is very related to measure theory. So 1868 to 1942. So let's do what we have to do. So X is a topological space. And let me ask you, what is the best collection of subsets that you can think of in a topological space? Of course, you have the power set, but in the moment the word topology comes, what do you think of? Which subsets are you thinking of?
Open sets.
Open sets. And by our previous observation, what is the last slide? Given any collection, you have
smallest sigma algebra.
Therefore, you can apply that observation here, right? So if you have any topological space, naturally it's a measure space where what is the sigma algebra? If I don't say anything, what is the sigma algebra that you are considering in a topological space?
Smallest sigma algebra containing all open sets.
Smallest sigma algebra containing
All open sets.
all the open sets. So it is such an important concept that it is good to have a name, and they are called that is called the Borel sigma algebra. Okay, named after Emily Borel, and a set in this collection is called a Borel set. Is the definition clear? What is a Borel set? A Borel set is a set belonging to the Borel sigma algebra, and Borel sigma algebra is the smallest sigma algebra containing all the open sets. So you need to be in a topological space, only then the notion of open set is there for you, and therefore you have the notion of a Borel set in any topological space. Agree? Can you give me an example of a Borel set? Can you give me the most obvious Borel sets?
Collection
Intervals.
of open interval in R.
Open sets. Open
Open
sets in
sets
R.
are of course Borel sets, right? Because Borel sigma algebra is the smallest sigma algebra containing all open sets. In particular, all the open sets are there. So we will denote it by B. Any element of the sigma algebra is called a Borel set. Open sets are of course Borel, no? Just from definition, by definition. Okay. Now tell me, closed sets are Borel?
Closed sets.
Yes, they are complement of open
Yes,
sets.
sir.
They are complement of open sets, and it's a sigma algebra. So closed sets are Borel. So there are of course Borel sets which are not open, right? Because a closed set may not be open. In topological spaces, you should be able to, I mean, at least in many topological spaces, you should be able to construct closed sets which are not open sets, no? So they are also Borel sets, which are not open sets. So closed sets are also Borel. But if you take countable union of open sets, then are you saying something new or nothing new? Because you can also take countable union, not just complement in sigma algebra. Suppose you take countable union of open sets. Are you saying something new or you're not saying anything new?
Nothing new, sir.
I think
Nothing
we can
new,
say
right?
semi-closed, semi-open.
Yeah, because countable union of open is anyway open, so nothing new. Similarly, if you take a countable intersection of closed, then nothing new because that is anyway closed. But what you can construct two new things, no? What are they?
Countable intersection.
Full intersection of open.
Countable intersection of open sets, and you can also take
Countable union of closed set.
yes, and they will also be Borel, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and they may be more Borel sets. Borel sets may come in various other ways because while generating, you may do many other things. But these two constructions are so important that we are going to have names. So we are going to call a set F sigma if it can be obtained as a countable union of closed sets. Okay. And do you remember the definition of countable intersection of open set?
G delta.
G delta. Okay, so F sigma set by definition is a countable union of closed set, and a G delta set is a countable intersection of open sets. Okay, and we should have a good way of remembering this F sigma and G delta, because you may wonder, no, F sigma may be countable intersection of open sets. You might remember F sigma and G delta come in this way, and you may also remember you have to take countable intersection of open sets and countable union of closed sets. But still, which is F sigma, which is G delta, it's not so easy to remember, right? So it is good to remember in this following way. So this is from Wikipedia. F stands for firm. Okay, this is a French word, firm, and this means closed. In French. I think you have to mute. Some sound is coming. All of you, please mute yourselves, and when you answer, you can unmute.
Samarendra and Suraj.
Samarendra has muted. Suraj also, please mute. Yeah, good. And you unmute when you ask the question. So let me go back here. So F is for closed. Closed in French is F. That is why F. And once closed is there, you are taking countable union because countable intersection will not give anything new. And similarly, G is for Gebiet, and that is German. That is German word for area. Gebiet means area in German. And area is area of what? Area of a neighborhood. And neighborhood is like open. No, you usually think of open neighborhoods and not closed neighborhoods. So Gebiet kind of means open. Actual German word means area. Okay, and sigma is for sum. I think this SOMME is also pronounced as sum, and that actually means sum, and that is also French. And delta is for Durchschnitt, and that is German. Actually, when I use Google Translate, it said average, but Rudin says that means intersection. So if it means intersection, fine. G delta is countable intersection. Otherwise, somehow you interpret average as intersection. Okay. And one more observation which I observed only yesterday is you are taking French for F and you are taking German for G. When G comes, it is a German meaning, and when it comes F, it is a French meaning. That must be an accident, I think. Okay, so this I observed only yesterday, though I have taught this course before, and I knew about F delta and G sigma from my MSc or PhD days. This observation is only from yesterday evening when I was preparing for this class. So this also tells you that since all of you are PhD students, most likely you are planning to continue in academia, no? Is that correct, or are you planning to move to industry or something after PhD? Yeah, one or two you can tell me. Academia, okay. But when you are teaching, it is it's always nice, because when you teach, you are always learning something new. Even though I have taught this course before, even though I have learned this before, okay, many times we forget and we relearn when we teach, but we also learn something new all the time. For example, this observation that when we use F, it is origin is French, and when we use G, the origin is German. This is an observation which I made for the first time only yesterday night, not before. Anyway, so sum is like union. Sum is like union, no? And product is like intersection, right? This is well known. It can actually be interpreted to be correct. And area is like neighborhood or open, and interpret average as intersection I have written. But after that, I saw that Rudin actually mentions this word Durchschnitt, and he says the meaning is intersection. But when I put Durchschnitt in Google Translate, it did not give intersection. And when I put intersection in Google Translate and looked for German, that gave me some other word. But maybe Durchschnitt means intersection. I don't know. Okay, so once you remember this, then you can always remember F sigma and G delta. F sigma is countable union of closed. You only need to remember closed. And once you remember one, you know the other is the other. Therefore, G delta is open. So the moment you remember F sigma is firm, and that means closed in French, the other one you can always remember in terms of that. And Rudin says, that's why I put Hausdorff also, that this notation is due to Hausdorff. That's what Rudin says. Okay, let's continue. And by the way, Borel is French and Hausdorff is German. Okay, one more thing. Okay, this of course I knew. And so one more connection. Okay. So by the way, you can read the Wikipedia page. Hausdorff was also involved in politics. He was an MP or a minister or something. Okay, so we will come to an end of this course. Let's do a few more things and then we stop. So suppose F is a function from a measurable space to a topological space, and consider this collection E contained in Y such that F inverse E belongs to M, right? Y is a topological space, and F is some arbitrary function from this measurable space to this topological space. And consider the collection omega consisting of all those sets of the codomain, okay, on the right hand side, which have the property that their inverses are measurable. Okay, so consider this collection, and the first observation is that this is a sigma algebra. So given a topological space, we already know that there is a very good sigma algebra, which is the Borel sigma algebra. Now we are saying that you can make other sigma algebras like this. Okay, so given any function, using that function you can create a sigma algebra. Okay, so why is this a sigma algebra? This is obvious. Is the full set there?
Yes.
Full set is Y. Full set is Y, and what is F inverse of Y? F inverse of y is x and x is there. So that is there. If something is there, if E is there, is E complement there? Yes, because F inverse of E complement is F inverse E complement. That is there. And similarly union also. So it's obvious. Countable union also. Because F inverse of union is union of F inverse. So this you can easily take. And suppose F is given to be measurable. Suppose F is given to be measurable. That means what? Inverse image of open sets are in M. So if F is given to be measurable in terms of omega, what can you say? What is the observation that you can make about omega?
Is topology.
Omega by definition is all those E such that F inverse E belongs to M. And now you also know that F is measurable function, which means F inverse of an open set belongs to M. Right?
So Borel sigma algebra.
Borel
maybe.
sigma.
So yeah, even before Borel, what you know is omega contains all
the open sets.
Open sets. And Borel sigma algebra is the smallest sigma algebra containing all open sets. And therefore, what can you say about omega?
Omega contains Borel sigma algebra.
Omega contains Borel sigma algebra. So E belongs to B implies F inverse E belongs to M. This is a nice and abstract argument that this argument we already, yeah. So we are going to say that if F is measurable, inverse image of a Borel set belongs to M. We already proved this now. Why? What is the proof? This is very easy, but it's kind of an abstract argument. And what is the proof? That if E is a Borel set, then F inverse E belongs to M. That just means omega contains a Borel sigma algebra, right?
Yeah.
This statement is same as saying omega contains a Borel sigma algebra, which you have proved. Because F is measurable, omega contains open sets, and Borel sigma algebra is the smallest sigma algebra containing all open sets, and therefore omega contains the smallest Borel algebra, and that's exactly the statement. So this is very, very nice. Okay, so this we just did, and use the definition of measurability and conclude open sets are in omega, therefore omega contains B. This is the proof, as B is the sigma algebra generated by open sets, smallest sigma algebra. Okay, so this is a very nice observation that inverse image of any Borel set is, if F is measurable, inverse image of open set is measurable is the definition, but inverse image of Borel set is measurable comes for free. Inverse image of open set is measurable is the definition, but for free you also conclude that inverse image of a Borel set is measurable. And you have this beautiful corollary, which is that earlier we made this observation that continuous composed with measurable is measurable, right? Can you recall the proof? If F is measurable and G is continuous, we proved that G composed F is
G composite F.
measurable, and you have to take G composed F inverse of open set, which is F inverse of G inverse of V. V is open, therefore G inverse V is open because G is continuous, and because G inverse V is open and F is measurable, F inverse of G inverse of V is open. This was the proof, right? Now I am going to make it better. By the way, what is a Borel map? I have not told you. What is a Borel map? Can you give me the definition? We have defined a Borel set. But what is a Borel map?
Inverse image of Borel match. Open set. Borel set is Borel, I think.
Yes. Borel map is nothing but measurable. Borel map is same as measurable, but with respect to which sigma algebra? With respect to the Borel sigma algebra. So if you have a topological space and another topological space, x to y, x and y are topological spaces, you think of x as a measurable space with respect to the Borel sigma algebra, and the function f from x to y is said to be a Borel map if it is Borel measurable, meaning measurable with respect to the Borel sigma algebra. Now, do you agree that continuous functions are Borel maps?
Yes.
Do you agree that? Yeah, it's obvious. Why? Because continuous function inverse image of open set is open, but open set is of course Borel. So continuous maps are the most obvious Borel maps. So if I am going to generalize this statement, which we have already proved, can you guess the generalization? Because just now I told you that continuous maps are of course Borel. So what could be a generalization of this statement?
Borel map composed with measurable is measurable.
Yes, a good generalization of the statement is Borel composed with measurable is measurable. And where is this happening? In order to think of Borel maps, you have to be on a topological space valued in a topological space. So if f is from x to y Borel and g is from y to z, yeah, if f is from x is just measurable. If x is from x to y and g is from y to z, y and z are topological, x is just measurable, and g is Borel. Y to z, y and z are topological, so Borel makes sense. So g is from y to z Borel and f is from x to y measurable. Then we are claiming that g composed with f is measurable. What is the proof? Proof is already done, because you have to take g composed f inverse of an open set, right? Which is f inverse of g inverse of v. But because g is Borel, no, that's what you have to do. No, you have to do f inverse g inverse of f inverse of v. No, f composed g inverse of v, which is no g composed f. G composed f inverse of v is f inverse of g inverse of v. V is open and g is a Borel map. Therefore, what is g inverse of v? What can you say? G is Borel measurable. So what is g inverse of v?
Which is a Borel set.
Borel set. So you are taking f inverse of Borel set. If f is measurable, f inverse of a Borel set is measurable. That's what we just proved here. If E is a Borel set, then f inverse of E is measurable if f is measurable. So G inverse of V is a Borel set and f inverse of G inverse of V, that will be a Borel set, therefore that is measurable. So because of this abstract argument, you have generalized the earlier observation. Continuous composed with measurable is measurable. Now you can say Borel composed with measurable is measurable. Okay, so this is a corollary to the previous observation. Now, one final observation is that your MSc definition of real measurability follows. So in MSc you had y was extended real line, and your definition, some books, the definition of measurability was this. If you take alpha to infinity, including infinity, and alpha open, then if f inverse of alpha infinity is measurable for every alpha, then that was the definition of measurability in some books, right? But according to our definition also, we can show that f is measurable. This is easy. We need to show that inverse image of any open set is measurable. But this much is given. If open set is of this form, it is given. So you have to check open sets of this form. Minus infinity closed and alpha open. But you can write it as a countable union of closed sets like this. But a closed set like this is a complement of an open set of this form. And this is measurable is given. F inverse of this is measurable is given. Therefore, complement also is okay, and therefore countable union is also okay. Therefore, f inverse of this is also measurable. So that is okay. Only thing remaining is something of this form, a proper open interval alpha to beta, but that can be written as intersection of the above two things. Therefore, that is also okay. So we already know that this is a sigma algebra, and therefore, since these two sets are there, and you know that in extended real line, any open set will be a union of open sets of these three forms, right? Extended real line, the natural topology, the basis is given by these three kinds of intervals. And therefore, checking this is enough. In MSc, checking this was enough in order to show that f is measurable in our definition. Okay. Now I think it's a very last thing, which is that if fn's, if you have a sequence of functions valued in extended real line, if these are measurable, then all these things are measurable. You can take the supremum of these functions, you can take the infimum of these functions, you can take the lim sup of these functions, you can take the lim inf of these functions, all these are measurable. Let's prove one or two of this and then we will stop. So the first thing is, suppose you take supremum of fn. What is the definition of this function g? G of x is supremum of fnx. You take the collection fnx as n varies and you take the supremum, least upper bound. So what is, so you just need to check for alpha to infinity such intervals, right? By the previous observation. So what is g inverse of alpha to infinity? That means set of all x such that g of x is bigger than alpha. But g of x is supremum of fnx. That is bigger than alpha. That means strictly bigger than alpha. That means at least one n fnx is bigger than alpha, right? Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So what is this therefore? In terms of fn, what is this inverse image? At least for one n, fn of x is bigger than alpha. That means x belongs to fn inverse of that, at least for one n. Therefore, this should be union of fn inverse. You agree? And similarly, you can check the other way. If x belongs to the right hand side, then for some n fnx is bigger than alpha. If for some n fnx is bigger than alpha, then gx is bigger than alpha because g is a supremum. So, and this is enough, right? Because fn's are given to be measurable. So fn inverse of alpha infinity is measurable. Countable union of measurable is measurable. Therefore, g inverse of this is measurable. Therefore, g is measurable. Similarly, you can show for g prime. What will be g prime inverse of alpha infinity? Take a guess, and your guess has to be correct.
Intersection of f.
Countable intersection, and therefore that also is gone. Now for h, what do you do? So therefore g and g prime are measurable. If you want to do h is lim sup. What is the definition of lim sup? What do you? How do you have two definitions? One is either, I mean, you have two equivalent definitions. One is you take subsequential limits and take the supremum, and what is the other definition?
Infimum of supremum of fn.
Yeah, infimum of supremum of. So you take the whole sequence, then you remove the first one, take that sequence, remove the first two, take that sequence. You take
Yes.
supremum of all those and take the infimum. So lim sup is infimum of supremum. Agree? H is
Yes.
infimum over k bigger than or equal to 1 of supremum fi I bigger than or equal to k. But by the previous observation, since fi's are measurable, you agree that sup fi is measurable, right?
Yes.
All those are measurable, and infimum of measurable is also measurable. Therefore, that proves that h is measurable, and similarly h prime also, because h prime will be supremum of infimum, and therefore that is also measurable. In particular, if you have a sequence of functions, and suppose point-wise limit exists, point-wise limit makes sense, then that is measurable. Why? Because if limit exists, then lim sup and lim inf always exist because you are an extended real line. And if point-wise limit exists, what do you know? That equal to lim sup and lim inf will match, and that will be the point-wise limit, right? When limit
Yes, sir.
exists, that is lim sup equal to lim inf, and we already showed that that is measurable. So point-wise limit is always measurable, and in particular, we have shown that sup and inf are measurable. In particular, maximum is measurable and minimum is measurable. And this is just to introduce this notation. F plus is maximum of f and constant function 0, and f minus is minimum of f and 0, but put a minus sign. So both f plus and f minus are non-negative functions. Sometimes I may say positive, which is not true, non-negative functions. And these two non-negative functions are very important. Yeah.
For f minus,
Hmm?
for f minus, it should be minimum of minus f comma 0. Notation, definition, we define f plus maximum of f comma 0, and f minus is equal to minimum of minus f comma 0.
Are you sure? I think this is what I wanted.
Yes.
Okay, let's check.
If it is minus mean a minimum of f comma 1.
Yeah.
Then
let's check what I want.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. It's okay.
No,
okay.
Okay.
Both are
Okay.
equivalent. Both are
This is
equivalent.
okay. Because what I really want is the following. What I want is f should be the difference of these two.
Yes.
So that will, so suppose, you know, suppose f is, f takes values just 1 and 2. Okay. Then f plus is constant function 2, and f minus is what? Minus 1, right?
Yes.
If f takes only values 1 and 2, then f plus is constant function 2 and f minus is constant function minus 1, no? In this definition. So what will be f plus minus f minus? Oh no. So maybe he is right.
Yes, sir,
No,
we have to take minimum of f comma
minimum
0.
of f and 0. So if f is taking values 1 and 2, then f minus is 0. And No, f minus s minus 1 or 0. F minus s minus 1 or 0, right?
Yes, yes.
No, f minus is always 0, right?
Yes.
No, these are functions. So maximum of f0 is the function maximum of fx comma 0. So f plus will also be 2 or 1, right? So you will get,
Yes.
yeah, you will get it back. You will get with f plus minus f minus, you will get it back. And mod f will be f plus plus f minus. I think this is okay. This is fine. With this definition only, this is true, no? F
Yes.
plus plus f minus will be, you take the maximum and you add minus of the minimum, and that will be the modulus. This is fine. Okay. And f plus and f minus are measurable, right? If f is measurable, then f plus and f minus are measurable. And this mod f and f have these two properties. And this is also an obvious observation that whenever you write f equal to g minus h with g and h as non-negative, then f can be written as f plus minus f minus. In another way, maybe you can write it as g minus h, but then observe that whenever you can write like that, f plus is less than or equal to g and f minus is less than or equal to h. So there is a certain uniqueness in writing f as f plus minus f minus. And these are measurable functions. I think this is my last slide. Yes, this is my last slide. And we almost ran out of time also. So let me stop sharing the screen. And any quick question? We're already out of time, but if you have any quick question or comment, you can ask.
Sir, from where we can find your slides?
The slides. So what do you suggest? Slides, shall I put on Moodle?
Yes, sir. It will be.
Okay. So I'll put it on Moodle. And when I put it on Moodle, shall I remove the pauses? You only need the material, no? You don't need to commit as line by line, no?
No, sir. Lecture recording will be also fine.
Lecture recording anyway will be there in MS Teams itself. But the slides I can remove the pauses, right?
Yes.
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 Yeah. So slides I will remove the pause and put it on Moodle sometime today itself. And the lecture recording will automatically be there, I think. After, it might take
Yes,
a
sir.
few minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes maybe. Automatically it will be there, but maybe I'll also upload it on department channel. Let me check. If the recording is very clear and very nice, then there's not so much disturbance in the lectures, then I might put it on YouTube also. Okay. But I encourage everybody. See, like today, Manoj had an emergency; he had to go to hospital. But unless emergencies are there, please do attend the lectures because it's a small class. No, see, if I was teaching BTech and if I have 700 students, I don't care if 400 students don't come because I can talk to the rest of 300. But with a small number like 8, we will not have meaningful discussions if some of you don't come. So please do come for the lectures. Yeah, attendance is not
Yes.
compulsory. I will never make it compulsory, but do come. That's a request. Okay, any other quick comment? By the way, yeah, Akshay has done a good thing. Come on video if you want to be part of, the YouTube lectures. You will be on YouTube. So others are also welcome to come if you want to be there. If you are not, really thought of it, come prepared from next lecture. You can show up at the very end before I stop recording. Anyone is coming or shall I stop recording?
Sir, I'm coming.
Yeah, come. Yeah, good. Anyone else? I think it should come. It should come in MS Teams. I don't know how the output will be, but I think it comes. In Zoom, it doesn't come. In Zoom, it depends on the settings, but MS Teams, it should come. We will see. So if that doesn't come, you figure out how to make this work. And from next lecture, anyway, we have 21 lectures maybe. For next lecture, we will make sure that everybody who wants to be on video can come on video, and that can be on YouTube. Okay. Anyone else interested? Shall I stop the recording then? Okay, good. Okay, bye then.
Okay.
I'll
Thank
stop
you.
the recording, and then we will say bye. So stop recording.